If you suddenly received an unexpected inheritance, do you know what you'd do with the dollars? Do you know that you would be able to use those dollars as a financial blessing instead of squandering it? I've got a real life planning example, the strategies we use, that more coming up. The great wealth transfer is underway. Apparently an estimated $84 trillion is set to transition from one generation to the next generation over the next couple of decades. And if you were blessed to receive an inheritance, and I get it, I understand it comes with real life and emotions and all of that heaviness and tragedy and sadness. Financially, do you know how you would use those dollars? And do you know that how you would use them would end up being a blessing instead of, years later when you look back, would you have this feeling of, I squandered those dollars? That's the phrase and the fear we hear a lot from folks. If they expect to receive an inheritance and we talk about it as part of their plan, we as a practice, we don't build it into the actual long-term plan, retirement plan, but you do need to be aware if you think that you're going to be receiving an inheritance, because it could impact your planning, your cash flow planning, your tax planning, your own estate planning, as well as your retirement planning. And the biggest thing as we're talking through that with folks is, I don't want to squander it. I don't want to squander it. Well, I was just meeting with one of our all-star certified financial planners, Holden Price, and we were just talking about a few things, and he was sharing a recent client story that was really fantastic, and that he said, well, we're doing fantastic work. And here's the situation. It's a young couple, I would say in their mid 40s, so young, I'm saying young, and financially, they don't have high income, they don't have high assets. However, this couple, it was strongly encouraged to them by a friend of theirs that they get started on the financial planning process, making sure that they had the right financial habits. They don't have a lot of resources, but they want to make sure that they're really wise with the resources that they have. So they gave us a call and started working with Holden less than a year ago. And yeah, they were saving up what they could, but there wasn't a lot of margin. They weren't saving up a ton. In fact, financially, early on in their life, they had received an incredible gift of that they ended up using for a down payment on a house. And that really was a pivotal moment for them financially. And one of their goals, they didn't have grandiose financial goals. They wanted to be wise stewards of the resources they did have, but they then were hoping to achieve some level of financial independence so they could then pay that gift forward, to be generous with others and be a giver to others, since they were the benefactor so many years ago. As Holden shared the story, he honestly said, yeah, there are some habit stuff that we needed to do financially, but there wasn't a lot of big changes and big moving pieces going on in their financial life until about 9 months into the relationship. He gives Holden a call, completely unexpected to them, completely off the radar. He was informed that his aunt had passed away, and as awful as that was and sad as that was, he was then also informed that he was listed in the will and was set to receive an inheritance of $150,000. Now again, any inheritance is going to come with a lot of grief and a lot of emotions and a lot of sadness. And so detached from those, when you think about the great wealth transfer and this $84 trillion that's set to transfer, you can set those emotions aside, and it's easy for any of us to just fantasize a little and say, oh my goodness, if I had that wealthy uncle or wealthy aunt, or if I had some of that inheritance land in my lap, what would I do? Oh, think of the possibilities. That would give me so much financial freedom. I think instead, what the great wealth transfer for many people is going to look just like it did for this family, where there's an inheritance, and in their instance, it was unique in that it was a somewhat distant family member. They didn't really know that they were set to receive any money, but this trillions of dollars is really going to come in bite-sized chunks. $150,000. That's a lot of money, and yet it's enough to be dangerous, but not enough to really significantly change their financial life. Well, when Holden and I were talking, what a blessing that they had already started on a financial planning relationship. Because I asked Holden, I said, well, did you guys discuss at all, what are some hopes and dreams with those dollars? And he said, well, of course we did. They were very focused on on being generous and wanting to be generous in the long term. So they were very clear on, well, we want to use this money as to be a blessing to others. So what's the wise thing to do with it? So here's what they did. Through the planning relationship, they did 3 things. And I'll hit one right off the bat that wasn't on the list. It didn't make the 3. And that is part of this gift that they had received decades ago was help with a house. And they've bought that house. They've stayed in that house. It's appreciated significantly. They have a very low balance mortgage with a very low interest rate. And so it was a discussion, hey, should we use some of this to be debt-free, pay off the house? The house is the only debt they have. They live well within their means. And no, that was not decided upon. It was decided, nope, let's keep the mortgage where it is. In the spirit of being a blessing to others and their financial goals, the first thing they did with Holden was to update their 3 bank account system. If you're familiar with this is first bank account is your immediate spending. That's your monthly budget, how much income's coming in, how much money is going out for known monthly expenses. There wasn't a lot of work to do there. They've been working that system since working with Holden. Bucket number 2 is their delayed spending, and that is the known upcoming expenses. And these are non-monthly, okay, but this is something that you've already committed to doing. Sometimes it's a short-term goal, like a vacation, or maybe an improvement, home improvement, or maybe a car replacement, something like that. And sometimes it's just obligations. Well, property taxes or insurance, insurance bills are due maybe once a year or every 6 months, something like that. So they tuned into that and they realized there's a few of those buckets that they needed to top off, a few of those goals that they needed to top off, as well as a short-term goal that they hadn't had the resources to really fund aggressively, and they used some of these dollars to fund that short-term goal. And then the third bank account, that third bucket, is the emergency fund. And they were close to achieving that goal. They had a high target, and they weren't quite there, but they were close. And so they used some of these resources, some of the inheritance dollars, to top off and fully fund their emergency fund. So that's the first thing. They shored up their financial foundation, their 3 bank account system. Second, they then tuned into their long-term plan, their long-term retirement plan, that 5-factor retirement plan. Because again, they were very, very clear. While, some people, it might be very common to think, with receiving an inheritance, I could quit my job, I could do these things. And sure, that's appropriate. They were very clear that they wanted to be a blessing to others. And you might say, well, then they could have just gifted this inheritance on to other people or other organizations. And yeah, that was considered. But instead, they wanted then to, well, how can we use these dollars to strengthen our long-term financial future so that we have a sustainable ability to be generous over the long term? Instead of just being generous here in the moment with these pennies from heaven, how can they use these dollars to strengthen their long-term plan to be sustainably generous? And so they looked and said, well, how much of these dollars can be absorbed into that long-term retirement plan? And what does that mean for their ability to retire and achieve financial independence? So they worked through that plan and they realigned some of those goals. They refocused and re-strategized some of those 5 factors that they had input into that plan. So significant help there. And then that led them to step number 3. Step number 3 was, of these dollars that they were going to put on the conveyor belt and move downstream for retirement, they said, well, how can we be tax efficient? Well, Holden did. How can we be tax efficient with these dollars? And he has a unique situation through his occupation where he's able to contribute to a 403B as a pastor, able to contribute to a 403B and get a tax deduction today, not just on his federal and state taxes, but also on self-employment tax, which the rest of us, if you're not self-employed or a pastor, dual status minister, you pay FICA. You pay half of self-employment tax, and our retirement contributions aren't a deduction. We still pay FICA tax on our retirement contributions, but not for pastors. Pastors have to pay both sides of FICA, so self-employment tax. So that's not fun. However, their retirement contributions, pre-tax retirement contributions, are a deduction from that self-employment tax. So that made sense to get this extra deduction for it, but also, and you might say, well, Mike, I thought you were a big fan of the Roth. Why wouldn't you guys say to do the Roth? Because pastors, ministers are allowed to, in retirement, withdraw pre-tax dollars, withdraw dollars from their 403B and still use it as a housing allowance. So withdraw it tax-free. And so Holden explained and taught this, had already taught it at the beginning of the relationship because they were funding the 403B sum. but they want to use these dollars to max out that tax benefit and max out their 403b. So you can't just write a check from your checking account or from an inheritance into your 403b. It's got to come out of their paycheck. So they increased the contributions to the 403b and did so for just the abbreviated rest of this year. They're going to do it for about 3 years. And they increased the 403b contributions. That reduced his take-home pay. They quantified exactly what the reduction in take-home pay was, and they started an automatic withdrawal or automatic transfer from this inheritance, the bank account where they had the inheritance, into their checking account. This allowed them to kind of do the shell game, two-step, to get the tax benefit from those dollars while also not squandering them, because they set up an automatic transfer so that they're not spending through those too quickly. So there you have it. Clarity, confidence, a little bit of creativity as well. That's what your certified financial planner should be bringing. So the question is, if you received an inheritance out of the blue, would you be able to use it as a financial blessing instead of potentially looking back and saying, I squandered that opportunity. I don't want that for you. Work with your certified financial planner. Have a game plan. Have clear direction, clear goals. So if you do, and when you do receive an inheritance, it can be that blessing and accelerate you towards your financial future and the life that you're called to. Work with your certified financial planner on that. If you don't have a CFP on your team, you can contact one on my team. Find us online, Korhorn.com. That's Korhorn with K, wisemoneyshow.com. You can find us there as well, or send us an email, info@korhorn.com. All right, there you have it. Go out and take your next wise step in your financial life.